You're listening to Learning How to Live, the podcast about what happens after you wake up from the life you were told to want. I'm Stainfield-Bruce, and 6 years ago my best attempt at life had failed. Now I'm learning how to rebuild work, love, health, and self-worth, and I'm inviting you to learn alongside me. Let's get into it. Again, welcome back to Season 1, Episode 6 of the Learning How to Live podcast, lifting the lid on 12-step recovery. I'm here with my sponsee of 4.5 years, Sean. Sean, say hi.
Hello.
Welcome. Thank you for being brave enough to do this with me.
That's fine.
Look, this whole podcast is about how I came to learn how to live after the first 34 years of my life had tragically failed. All of the jobs and the relationships and any money I made, and it sort of brought me to my knees emotionally, spiritually, and probably the most fundamental part of me learning how to live was in stopping taking drugs post-rehab and throwing myself into 12-step recovery. We're going to try and avoid talking about any specific fellowship here because this is simply our subjective opinion, of course, of 12-step recovery. But I think there's something very special in the dynamic of a sponsor and a sponsee being able to talk about 12-step recovery. I would hope that some people may benefit from hearing our experience, whether people who are thinking about recovery, thinking about 12-step recovery, or maybe people who know people who might need some sort of recovery, or it could just be people interested in the philosophy of 12 steps. And, for me, philosophy is a way to live. It's a philosophy of how to live life. And 12 steps for me has always been that. And, the fact that it is such a powerful amalgamation of analysis, therapy, stoicism, some of the wisdom from most of the world's great religions, it's a very, very powerful way to live. And so I want to cover with you, if you're willing, all of these different aspects. I want to talk about addiction a bit. I don't really want to go into war stories. Anyone who's lived addiction or has survived addiction or knows someone who has been addicted or is addicted knows how terrible it is. But I want to sort of maybe talk about that different mindset that we had previous to recovery. Talk about what early recovery in 12-step looks like, some of the barriers to entry, because, God knows that we did not get to 12-step recovery the first time we were introduced to it. Some of the early gifts, the immediate wins, and some of the later ones as well. And then how it impacts all other aspects of our life, how maybe 12-step applies to love or work or our relationship with family and friends, and anything else we feel, we might have time to cover and touch on. So, as this isn't really a conventional podcast where it's like, well, I'm going to invite this guest on who is, a world famous music producer who is going to have opinions on these types of things in industry or is an expert in this, and this, because it's not that type of podcast. This is actually like, you're in recovery. Tell me about recovery. I don't know how much of an intro you want to give, but, say hello.
Hello. That's it. I'm sure if there's any. Yeah, I don't think there's any intro. Doesn't matter what. So maybe that might become relevant as I talk about certain things. But yeah, I'm an addict. I'm Sean.
Good intro. Yeah, my name's Quinn. I'm an addict. Okay, cool. All right. Well, tell me a little bit about what led you to coming into 12-step recovery.
Yeah, I was always a bit of an addict, but I definitely picked up a lot of drugs and drink and just, like people always say in the meetings and stuff as well, it's just sort of like, fantasy or this was my first addiction, like whatever. I definitely like from the get-go, there's just signs of me just being like, oh, I want it all and I want more. I just like it, like chocolate, whatever. It's just like, I'm going to eat until I'm sick. And then when I start drinking, it was, I'm going to drink until I'm sick. And then when I started using substances, it was, I'm going to use this until I'm blacking out. And I didn't understand why, nor did I think about it, nor did I have the capacity to even think about that sort of matter. I was just kind of like in this non-present merry-go-round going whatever, and it all got, the consequences just built up. There was a lot of time where there wasn't any consequences, or I didn't feel like I had any responsibility, and then it got to a point where I was 20 and a lot of my friends had gone off to uni, and I had just kind of dropped out of college and was working in the NHS, but I got fired because of my using, and everything just went severely downhill. It was already bad, but it became very real as I became an adult. You know, when I was like 17, 18, I could kind of get away with it. And then once I was, at the age of 20, it was all very real. I was homeless for a bit and managed to get back, and my parents put me in rehab. So it was the first time I kind of heard it for the 12 steps. Nothing kind of sank in. I didn't really understand. I didn't surrender. I didn't understand it. And I don't think it was really explained to me well. Nor did I have any interest. I just don't think I was ready to hear the message.
How would you have liked it to have been explained to you?
Well, the thing is, I've had sponsees, so I know now when I try and explain it to them that there is no way of getting through. But at the time,
What do you mean by that?
you know, we say attraction over promotion. Like when people told me to stop using, or people gave me information, said, do this, I just resisted. I don't think you can get this when someone tells you, you know, get clean. No, fuck off. I was already like, I'd been building up denial as if it was a tool in my arsenal, and I'd been building it up and building it up. So then someone comes along and says, you need to stop doing this. And I was ready to say no with like the full force of an army. Do you know what I mean?
Even though life was...
Even though I was in rehab in Luton, and you think I would have like some sort of, hey, maybe this isn't like the best way to live life, but I was still just so in it and unwilling to hear.
Tell me more. What does in it? What does in it mean? Like, see if you can like the emotional side of it. You know, the psychological side of it.
I mean, firstly, I don't think I had any understanding of emotions, and I don't think I had any understanding. Maybe we'll talk about meditation later, but you know, this idea that my thoughts aren't me. Up until I came to recovery, that wasn't a thing. I am my thoughts, and that's just all part of the same one thing, which is me. And so I was bound to it. But I didn't know, because I didn't understand that my thoughts aren't me. And
What were some of those thoughts?
Yeah, thoughts just about stopping using, or thoughts about things like suicide, or thoughts about, you know, anything that was self-deprecating, usually a lot worse than just self-deprecating sounds a bit light. But, you know, like just that sort of like, you know,
I'm worthless and unlovable.
Yeah, exactly. And I should just jump in front of this train.
Yeah.
But I also couldn't really acknowledge them. They just felt like this sort of, and yeah, my feelings just, I didn't understand. I had, yes, I'm good. And that was just what I told people. And then on the inside, I had feelings which I couldn't really like identify. It wasn't like I could go, oh, that's blue, that's pink, that's red, that's green. It was just, they kind of happened, and my body just went into shock all the time. And I was just desperately trying to get by.
This is what I think people maybe don't necessarily realize about addiction. And it doesn't matter whether it's drugs or food or gambling or sex or anything, is that these things are tools. They're solutions to the pain that one feels. You know, if one doesn't understand why they're in the pain they're in, if these thoughts, this low self-worth, low self-esteem, these self-deprecating narratives are going round and round, but one is unaware of them, it's very painful. And so we use solutions, tools. We come across tools that alleviate the pain. And obviously drugs is a massively powerful one.
It's a great one.
As is alcohol, and as is, you know, sugar and sex and all these things. And so when you need that thing in order to feel like you can tolerate life, no matter how much damage it causes, you will still continue to do it. I think that's just what I feel when you said, I'm still in it. That's what I think you're saying. I think you're saying is like, I'm in this pain, in these feelings. I don't know I'm in the feelings, and therefore I'm not willing to sacrifice the things I'm using to cope.
Yeah. As well as, I think, like, we discussed the idea of like I think when I hear people who are young in addiction and you get into it at an early age, I never learn any tools for handling any emotion, other than going out and distracting myself. And that usually also involved then just drugs to suppress it. So also there's just this idea that I had no tools for any emotion. And that was my only way of kind of coping with anything. And albeit it just created more and more problems and my life got considerably worse, I just thought that that was the only solution because I'd never known anything else. And someone saying, go for a jog, meditate, I'd have been like, fuck that. And I didn't know that could work because I'd never even tried it.
But then something did happen, right? You did. What happened then for you to finally surrender to recovery?
Yeah, I think when I went to rehab, it was like physically it looked like the worst. Like if you kind of look at like how my life looked, then it was on the floor. But maybe it hadn't got bad enough emotionally. And the drugs still seemed to be able to, or any substance still seemed to be able to kind of just like dumb that down. And when I came out of rehab, I just kind of continued using, like, starting off with little things and then building it back up to where I was, and then far worse. But I'd also just become so recluse. I'd stopped using any sort of things that you romanticize around any form of addictions to substances. You think of like partying and going out and all these sorts of things. And I'd gotten into so much fear and I was just constantly paranoid and constantly just like, the feelings had got so bad that I'd then gone, well, why would I even go out? Because that's just kind of like, getting in the way of the real thing, which I want to do, which is just kind of blackout, oblivion, completely, then I don't really have to deal with anything. I can just really go to nothing. And so then it became, I'm literally just by myself. I was already using and drinking by myself, but this got to like, I'm actually not going to see people. And then COVID hit. So I think so like the first 4 months of kind of the lockdown was just, it became so apparent what was going on. Like I couldn't hide from it. And I think the feelings just caught up. I don't know, or maybe there was some intervention from a higher power. I don't know what it was, but at some point, I was at home with my parents and I got found out that they knew everything was going on, but they just couldn't figure it out. And then at a certain point, they managed to kind of catch me, and they'd caught me hundreds of times before, but I woke up the next day and something had changed. And I don't know if it just all came over me and I realized how at the bottom I was and that there wasn't any sort of way of like justifying it, or, I always used to kind of, all my friends are like this, all of a sudden. No, by that point it was like, I'd been alone in my room for months on end, not seeing anyone. And just that moment of clarity in the morning being like, wow, and it wasn't so sort of like dramatic as maybe before I went into rehab, but it was what I needed to see, was that it was just completely pathetic, and something flicked enough. I'd already been doing meetings and I'd been doing them occasionally for like, just to pay lip service, just to pretend that I was doing something and to kind of get people off my back. Never taken anything in. Like I didn't really like, you could ask me about it at that time and I wouldn't be able to describe anything about the meeting. I just turned up, sat down, usually high, and then left. Done my bit, fuck off. And this time I just went to a meeting and you were there, and it was online with Finsbury, and I heard some people talking and I heard what I needed to hear, and I was sober enough for that. It's just like you have these little windows, and that was a window that was tiny, but just at that little moment I heard just a couple things that I needed to hear. One of them, to be honest, being a young person in addiction, was just seeing other people who looked attractive and cool, and as like sort of like shallow as that is, I was like, this girl's young and beautiful and seems really cool, and she's talking about being clean, and that was enough. It just kind of just got me thinking enough. That was all I had to do, was just get me thinking enough to go, maybe I'll do one more day. And that was that, and then it snowballs. But it was just like a little window. I heard a little thing that I needed to hear, and
two things in what you're saying I really want to pick up on. One, slightly more trivially, is that it's a personal sort of pet hate, I think, how 12-step recovery gets portrayed in the media. Whether it's on Netflix or TV or whatever, it's always generally people quite gloomy, in quite a gloomy environment,
old men
being depressed about some terrible thing and hating being there and everything. And every time I see it on TV, it annoys me, because it's just not my experience of 12-step recovery.
No.
And like what you just described, where you walk in, you see like people like happy, and people like living life, and people like joking and looking well. Like, that's my experience. But like, I've never gone to a meeting and it's not been some people, like people who are sort of happy to see you or happy to see each other, and that positivity, that sort of it, like, because it's a frequency of love. It's like it's caring about one another. And that can make that, when you turn up somewhere and that's your experience, after the narrative that we tell ourselves, how we treat ourselves, and then to be sort of greeted with a smile and maybe a hug and whatever, it's a game changer. But the more important thing, I think, that you were talking about is the surrender. Because how I describe it's a surrender. And like you said, it was a quiet thing. It wasn't this catastrophic collapse of, of burning everything down. Because that was my experience as well. I knew for 8.5 years I had a problem, and I was going to meetings sporadically, but I didn't surrender until 6.5 years ago. And it was a quiet surrender. It was just a quiet acknowledgement to myself that I no longer have the answers, and I cannot go on living like this anymore. I'd rather not go on living like this. This is, it's interesting again in 12-step. It's not that we make light of suicide, but most people in 12-step have sort of felt like death is an easier option, at least once or twice. And so, having stared over that precipice and knowing how beautiful life actually is today, we do make light of how we felt about that level of stuff. But I personally think it's healthy. But yeah, tell me about surrender as you understand it, which is a big word in recovery.
Surrender. I mean, I think, like, we talk about the steps a lot of the time. There seems to be like several sort of like things you can take from each step, whether it's be how you're practicing it at the time of doing the step or afterwards or whatever. Surrender at that time was just, in one of the readings in meetings, it says honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, and I always kind of equate that to being 1, 2, and 3, somewhat. And in surrender, I felt like at that time I had to get desperate enough to just see honestly what was going on, and to get honest with myself about the situation. And in doing so, I could kind of just like, at that time it was me seeing that maybe it's not my way. Look at where I am, and just seeing what I'd been doing and how I got to this place, and surrendering to the idea that, giving in to the idea that maybe my way of doing things isn't the right way of doing things, and that I can actually kind of like ask someone else or listen to someone else's experience, because I think I'd got to that place just gripping onto my way of doing things, just hanging on for dear life. And the faster and crazier it got, the tighter my grip was. Surrender was just like kind of letting go of that and realizing I didn't need to hold on, and that I didn't need to be the one fixing my problems, and that I didn't need to be in control of my brain. I didn't need to be in control of my life, and that I couldn't control my brain or my life. And so yeah, it was just a moment of honesty about all these sorts of things, and then the consequential like letting go of all these things. But I couldn't have done that without the sort of like moment of honesty in myself.
Because to segue like some of that into what practically that means in 12 step is that, you know, when you arrive, like we're told 3 big suggestions. So if you turn up your first 12-step meeting, I'm pretty sure this is ubiquitous across all fellowships, but let's do 90 meetings in 90 days. You know, like
It's big.
It's big. But you're right. Like if you told me to do anything for 90 days, even today, I'd be like, maybe, like, maybe I might do that. Like if you said have a coffee every day for 90 days, I'd be like, maybe, you know. So to commit to doing anything for 90 days is big, but that's one of them, which is funny that we even say that, because the other big mantra is just for today. Yeah, one of the first things you get told is do something for 90 days. It's interesting. Second one is get commitment. And what commitment means is, because every single meeting is fully self-supporting, meaning that the people that turn up for the meeting are the ones who run it. It's funded by people just donating whatever small change or whatever they have for teas and coffees and a little bit of renting the space. People have jobs at these things. So you might lay out the chairs, or you might make tea, or you might put the literature out, which is or you might be the secretary who, you know, holds the meeting. And the idea of taking commitment means that you commit to turn up to this meeting every week and to do this little job. And it took, for my first 8.5 years of going in and out of recovery, I did not get commitment, nor did I want to, under any circumstances, do any of those jobs. It was horrendous. The idea of turning up and putting chairs out. The thing, but you know, like, but this is the thing, is that we'll talk about this maybe in a minute, but the idea of being of service to other people was abhorrent to me.
Yeah.
I was so selfish. The idea that I might be doing something for others was horrible. The irony being that in doing stuff for other people, I learned how to have real self-esteem. But anyway, so that's number 2 is commitment. And the third one is find a sponsor, because, and it's not something you have to do immediately, but with a sponsor, you then have someone who can take you through the 12 steps. The 12 steps are 12 pieces of work that one does with someone who's done them before to work through recovery. And this is what I want us to try and lift the lid on for anyone listening who doesn't understand, because it's very easy for us to understand the beauty, power, and intricacy of the 12 steps. But if anyone just sort of hears it, it's all weird and strange. So I do want us to revisit that. But what you're saying is, in the surrender is being able to sort of follow those suggestions, because without giving up, we're not going to do these things like turn up to a meeting every day for 90 days. No. We're not going to get a commitment where we're helping other people. And we're definitely not going to go and find someone to take us through this invasive homework. Homework, yeah, and tell us what we should be doing with our lives. Yeah. You know, the only way that's going to work is if you've reached a point where you can humbly say to yourself, my best attempt hasn't worked. Like, I need someone to show me. I need some help. You know, and for egomaniacs like you and I, and most people, I think, in recovery, you know, it's not an easy thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it was just, as you said, I think I didn't even realize how self-centered I was. And it's only through doing now the work, which a lot of the 12 steps was about self-centeredness and the sort of manifestations of, you know, so I didn't realize how self-centered I was, but now I look back and like everything I ever did was pretty much self-centered. Like, I don't think I'd ever done things that I didn't need to be doing. I never did service of any kind for any sort of like religion, like church or anything like that. But yeah, just got to the point where I was like, someone just tell me what to do. And I don't think I liked it that much at start, but
Say more about that. So I think these are someone that comes into 12-step recovery. It's not easy necessarily.
No. And I think that's why a lot of people drop out, is because, and I know you were around for quite a while before it clicked, and so was I. And I'd taken dribs and drabs, so I knew that there was things that I had to do. I'd had sponsors before, between the time of me going to rehab and then getting it this time. So I understood some of it, but this idea of just really giving your all into it and being just like, just tell me what to do. And I think I just shut down any time I thought of the idea of it being annoying or whatever, because I got to the end.
Mm.
And so, I mean, I was calling you 12 days into my journey, saying I think I might take on a secretary position at a meeting, which is usually intended for 2 years in, because I didn't know what it was. And like you and other people had told me to get service. So I'd just gone, just give me service. And I was doing meetings every day and I asked for a sponsor and all these things at any time before I didn't have any willingness. And I think it was through that sort of like, I mean, we say 1, 2, and 3, they're kind of all together and they all have to happen somewhat at the start. I got honest, I surrendered to a point where I was open-minded to the idea of something else being a possibility. And then even more so, this sort of honesty and surrender to not just be open-minded, but fall into willingness, which I'd never kind of had before. And people tell me what to do and I just did it. To the point of, I remember you kind of, you said, call me every day for 30 days. And I was calling you every day for like 90 days. And you're like, okay, you don't have to now. White cooler. Yeah, I just kept doing it because it was just like, well, this is working.
I pretty much call my sponsor every day. Well, up until, I don't know, 6 months ago, I still called him every day.
Yeah. But it was a desperation. I got desperate enough to really just go, I don't get it.
Mm.
And that's fine. I don't get why I need to go to a meeting every day for 90 days, but I'll do it. Yeah. I don't know why I need to call you every day for 30 days or whatever, but I'll do it. I don't know why I need a sponsor. I don't understand the 12 steps, but that's the open-mindedness happening there, is me going, I don't get it, but I'll do it anyways because I'm desperate as hell.
But it's also unbelievably courageous, right? To do something without knowing why, do something without understanding what the impact's going to be, but because it intuitively feels right. Right? You look around and you see people who are like you, who understand what you've been going through, and they seem well. And so it's like, you know what? I'm just going to have faith. I'm just going to do this thing anyway. I don't really want to. My old patterns of behavior don't cater for it, but I will do it anyway. It's and it touches on like some of the early gifts. It's like going to meetings. Like when I came out of rehab and I started going, I went to a meeting every day. Of course, I think I did a meeting a day for 6 months. I think something like that. Some days I did 2. But what was I getting from it? Because I couldn't really hang out too much with my old friends. I couldn't go and hang out in pubs and bars, or I didn't want to. I didn't want to be around stuff like that. I didn't know what to do. My whole life had been hanging out in a certain way that allowed me to do what I wanted to do. And so now, what do I do? Well, going to meetings meant that I could get fellowship. Fellowship sounds so grandiose, but I got to make friends with new people who were going through what I was going through. I mean, it's unbelievably powerful from living a life of isolation and loneliness to then suddenly having like groups of friends that I could talk to all day, every day if I want to. So, go and have coffee with, go to have a meal with, or just chat on the phone for hours sometimes. And that was a huge gift from being in that place of loneliness and sort of self-loathing that I was in. That was a massive gift. Not having to have the answers anymore, and being able to have clarity that I'm following a process. That felt really nice. I think people are afraid to want to surrender their will to something, to a process, to a system. I think it's then probably a narrative that maybe is starting to dwindle in society, that if you're not the one in control, if you're not the one making all the decisions, that you're somehow weak. I don't know about you, but I wasn't shown how to live.
No.
So the idea that I would somehow have a formula for living life successfully.
I think also, I mean, it's just it's. I don't think it's also just for atheists. I think there's this atheist sort of thing of just being like, I need to know why, otherwise I don't believe you, and I need to know. But even in religion, I think a lot of people kind of firmly grip on to this idea that they have, and that they know all the answers because they've read them, and their reality is so kind of like just they're grabbing on and they won't let go, and they need to know, and they need to know why. And I was atheist coming in, and I needed to know why, otherwise I wouldn't believe you. And my whole life was based around that and so coming in again, it's just this idea of kind of like looking at going back to attraction over promotion, and you're talking about like fellowship and stuff like this. And it's like now when I try and bring people into meetings, I really try and just like take them to a fun meeting where there's young people, because a lot of people who ask me are young people. And maybe there's fellowship afterwards, or you all stood outside beforehand and you're just having a chat, and everyone always is kind of happy and like just having really good chat. And for me at that time, seeing people being sociable in what seemed like wasn't transactional, it just seemed very honest, and you got very different sorts of people all just having good chat. It's not just like, and all this stuff I didn't understand, but I had to be kind of like look at it and just be like, I don't get this. I don't know how people seem to be happy right now not using, and how like I was broken. So just seeing people have good communications and go for fellowship and do service. Why the hell are you doing something for this group with no return? You're not getting paid.
I mean, we got quite obsessed with service though. Like it was like there was that meeting in Finsbury where, it sort of became our like, our hub. Like we would, we wanted it to look great. We wanted it to be really welcoming, but we also wanted to have like the best teas and the best biscuits, and we wanted candles everywhere, and just have this whole vibe going. Like it became super important, but in a good way, because
it is important
because of what was exactly.
It can be.
And actually, I remember that meeting. It was like 3 people, and I think by the end of it, we sort of had 25 odd people come into it, maybe 30. I like also how many young people you see in meetings today. Like that's changed over the years, and I think it's really cool to see like people in their late teens. Or I mean, you could have been pretty early. I mean, you've been in recovery for how many years now?
Almost 5.
I mean, that's huge. It's like 5 years, and you're what, 26,
27, almost 28. No, I did get in young. But I think also that's the thing is our meeting that we go to is like a lot of young, cool people. It's in like a cool area and all this sort of stuff. But, a lot of people don't relate to that. And you see people sometimes come into our meetings that maybe don't. You need to see something that resonates with you. So at the time for me, I had to see, people who are like a relatively same age as me, and things that in the back of my head I kind of wanted to be, or I'll call a spade a spade. There was, gorgeous women there, and things that like in the back of my head kind of like got me thinking, oh, like this is kind of nice, And I think obviously if you're like, when I actually started service, one of those meetings that I went to was like all 60-year-olds, and they're all just like kind of like old rockers and stuff. And there was a lot of people coming in to that meeting who are like 65, 70. And they'd been drinking and using for like 45, 50 years. And, if they came into our meeting today, they probably wouldn't get it. They'd just be like, I don't get this. This isn't for me. But they go into the right meeting, and they see the sorts of people that they want to see, and just something needs to resonate with you that seems attractive, and the sort of people that you actually want to hang around with.
I think that is what's beautiful about 12 Step is, and it's tradition 4 that states that every meeting is autonomous. And what that means is that each meeting can have its own vibe. Each meeting is made up of its own sort of subtleties and its own, its own tone. And, and if one meeting doesn't feel right for one person, go and find another meeting. And, certainly in major cities, there's millions of meetings everywhere all the time. And so you do get that, like, there isn't this regimented format, and I mean, it's probably for another podcast if anyone ever wanted to actually understand the infrastructure of 12-step recovery, but it's a reverse pyramid. Like, it's the people in control are the majority that make up the meetings, not the people at the top of the hierarchy. The people at the top of the hierarchy are in service to everybody else. It's a reverse pyramid. Abstract, but
it makes sense when you do area service and stuff.
You don't do those levels of service. Yeah. Okay, cool. So you come in, early wins of turning up to meetings is things like fellowship. You get your commitment, you start feeling a part of, you start having a little bit of purpose even, actually. And then you get your sponsor. Talk about that.
I didn't get you right away. I wanted you.
I wasn't sponsored.
You denied
right away.
You denied me. And
this is how far back we go, though, which I think is cool, right? Because we go back to, and I started sponsoring you when I was a year and a half in.
When I got in, you were about a year and a half.
Right.
And your sponsor hadn't said you can sponsor.
He said wait till step 9.
Yeah, and you hadn't done that. So I came in and I asked you, because you were at that first meeting I went to, and you were talking in a way that I was just like, I need this. I don't get it, but I need this. So I asked you. And you said no. And I found someone else for a bit.
I said no because I thought I wasn't ready, not because I didn't want to.
You regrettably declined. And then anyways, I got someone else. And then like a week later, you said, I'm actually ready now, but I'd already found a sponsor. So not long after that, I'd binned him because I just had my sights set on you. So that was that. But
sweet. It
was because in that first meeting, that was just like some energy source. That was me going, that got me in. That got me over a day or two. And I carried on going to Finsbury Park, and it was that meeting that, kept me coming back. And the energy in that room, even though I was on Zoom at the time, was that was the kind of thing that was driving me forward a lot at the start. So I asked you to be my sponsor a little bit later. And you said yes. And
so what was the early gifts of the sponsor-sponsee dynamic? And it doesn't even just need to be hours, but
I think
like someone who's someone
who actually gives their time away was just weird to me. That isn't my family, but also in my family, my parents, as amazing as they are and loving and stuff like that, I never got this sort of like, my dad can be quite closed off sometimes, and my mum is very anxious, and I don't really get that sort of like, but me saying, can you be my sponsor? And then you actually picking up the phone to me for 30 days. I had the eagerness to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the eagerness to keep coming to meetings and doing my night but I just got to this place. You actually picked up and listened to me, and I was a nutter. I mean, I still am a nutter, and you still have to listen to me. But at the time, like, I look back and like, I was actually mental. And we would speak for 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes sometimes, every day. And it just kept going on, and you just gave me your time. And that was just weird because, as I said, like, I came in and I didn't understand the idea of doing service, doing selfless deeds. That was just nonsense. And here you are kind of just like giving me your time unconditionally, not asking anything back. And you'd say things like, I get as much out of this as you do. And there is like certain ideas that sponsees help their sponsors, through their recovery later down the line. And I'm aware of that now. But at the time it was just, you're still listening to me. Like, you're still here. And like, I think as well, like, just as meetings can be all over the place and be completely different, sponsors can be completely different styles. And I thought like you resonated with me, but also you were never too forceful. And I think that's a lot of the sorts of things is that still at that time, I was so fragile. And if someone was to come along and start giving me loads of rules, that's why it's hiddenly said as like suggestions. That's like, it's not a suggestion, you do it, but it's said as suggestion. Everything is packaged and the way
Well, it's do it or don't
do it or don't do it. You don't have to do it, but this is what you.
But if you do it will work. If you
word,
don't, it won't.
No, but and I'd figure that out by that point. But wording, the way it's worded, the way that you told me about things, and maybe like got me onto things was very still in line with this attraction over promotion.
But
you just go like
the core.
You know,
at the core of 12-step recovery is this idea of attraction rather than promotion. And this is really anyone who doesn't understand 12-step and wants to, needs to, if they can understand this premise, they can understand the beauty and the innocence and the love of what 12-step is. Because it's not about promotion. Even arguably us talking about this publicly is not here. We're not here to try and promote. This is why we're not naming any fellowships. We're talking about our experience of 12-step because we're not here to tell you it's really good, go and do it. We are saying that for us, it changed our life, right? This is how it changed our life. This is how we feel today. And because of that, you can either be interested or not. And if you're interested, feel free to ask. And if you do ask, then this is what people will say. They will say, well, this is what worked for me.
Yeah.
It won't be do this. It won't be here's the rules. If you don't do them, you're out. But like that is not how it works. It's like this is what worked for me. If you like what's working for me, by all means give it a go. If not a problem.
Yeah. And you were just a person to come and give me a bunch of ideas.
Just as my sponsor was.
Here are all the tools that I've used. This is what my sponsors told me. And still today, when I have my sponsees, all I say is, this is either something I picked up from loads of people saying in the meetings, or this is just what my sponsor told me. And that's it. There's no sort of like, I'm not putting my opinion in there as much as I can. I'm human, but you know, I'm doing my best not put any of my opinion in there, and I'm not kind of telling them what to do. I'm just saying this is what was told to me. And it's this sort of like trickle down effect of the same things being said. And it's often paired with, well, this has worked for millions of people, you know, and if it needs that extra nudge as to why to do this specific thing.
I like my modus operandi generally is that I don't call sponsees. And this is something I did learn generally from my sponsor, and it's certainly not a rule, and I don't think everyone's like this, but for me, I will always answer the phone.
Yeah.
If a sponsee phones me, and if I don't answer straight away, I'll phone back as soon as I can. I will always answer, and that doesn't matter whether they call me 5 times a day or once every 6 months. I'll always answer, but I'm not going to chase. And it's not that I'm not going to chase. It's I think what you've triggered in me is this idea that actually, again, it's this attraction rather than promotion. You got all the space in the world. There's no pressure for me to do step work, to do any of this, but I am here for you. And it's as close to unconditionally as one can, I think, get. You know, we didn't really understand even the term unconditionally, but this attraction rather than promotion fundamental really is just a beautiful, beautiful thing, which means that nobody should be afraid of having to do things that they don't want to do. No one's ever going to have to do anything they don't want to do in 12-step recovery. Okay, so that's good. So if that's some idea about sponsorship, you know, finding a sponsor, just to debunk maybe some of the myths around that. For us, anyway, I think it was a fairly simple process. If you just, when you hear something or see someone who says something that resonates with you, you just go and ask them if they'll sponsor you. It's not that complicated, you know. It's and then from there you can start building that relationship with someone. But in a world today, I think especially, without want to deviate too far, but people need mentors, male and female. I know specifically of young men today, like to have a mentor figure, someone that you can trust, someone that wants nothing. This is, I think, one of the biggest things about sponsorship. To want nothing from someone except for their well-being. Like, I want nothing from my sponsees except for their well-being. That's it. To have
You've also accepted that you can't control that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't really phone sponsors away from me.
Yeah.
Mostly.
But that's weird. Like, that concept is still kind of like, and I'm a sponsor to people and I want nothing from them. I just hope they succeed. And I've accepted if they don't, that it is what it is, and that there's nothing I can do because I'm just a tool for them to use if they want. But that's still a weird concept to me, just someone doing this, because obviously the idea is that it's passed down and you give on to others what you were kind of given. But there's no sort of like incentive. You just do it. And that was weird to me, that someone was just kind of doing that for me and didn't ask for anything in return.
Yeah. We keep what we have by giving it away. So why do I make all my time available to you? Or one of the reasons is that my sponsor made all of this time available to me. And the thing that you often hear between sponsors and sponsees is, look, I won't ask anything except that you do this for someone else one day. And yes, that's one of the reasons that we do it, like you say. But you're right, there is also something really magical about building a non-transactional relationship, maybe for the first time in our life.
First time ever.
Yeah. Yeah. With, usually an older male, if you're male, female, if you're female, role model in some capacity. It wasn't conventional for us.
No, it's a weird concept.
But it definitely actually paved the way for me to, ask other men to mentor me in other things, business, spirituality. Like, recovery taught me that. 12-step taught me how to do that, how to be humble, how to listen. How humble is a big one.
And moving into, I don't know, this is like something I want to talk about later down the line, but just in terms of how, I think our relationship might have been the first time I was present in a relationship and it wasn't transactional and there was no sort of like, and how that then seeps into sort of like, well, I could be like that with my friends. And then, as you say, like going into like love and relationships, and that's a different ballpark. But the first one was kind of friends and learning that I could be honest with my friends, like I could be honest with you. And I could ask for nothing off them and give them my time, in the same way. And just the ways that it all kind of then loops in as this sort of like what our relationship has been and grown into is almost a bit of a template sometimes for how I can seep those things into my other relationships with all the positive things that happen between us.
Dude, the biggest thing you just said is honesty, right? Like, to be honest with another human being, right? Like this, and certainly my relationship with my sponsor, like I had it, I want to say beaten into me. It wasn't beaten into me, but I didn't know how to be honest with. Maybe we'll convince him to do this with us. But he was very aloof when I suggested it. About why are you being aloof? Anyway, maybe we'll get the famous Andrew on him. But yeah, when it came to, I didn't know how to be honest with myself, right? So I had to build a relationship of trust with someone who I trusted enough that when they told me I was being dishonest, that I would listen. And even then I wouldn't initially. I remember that sort of my first 6 months, I'd be saying something. I'd be telling him like, this is why I need to do this thing and da-da-da-da. And he's like, nope, you're lying to yourself. I'm not lying. You don't understand. He's like, you're lying. You
still do that to me.
Well, we still do it. We still do it to each other, man. But but at least when we do it, right, the response is, okay, let me think about this, right? It's not, no.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, that's that you're not being honest with yourself. Okay, pause. I need to, let me investigate, because right now I just don't see it. That's humility. having enough humility to pause and go, I can't see where I'm wrong, but maybe I am. That is a superpower, because for the first 3 to 6 months of my sponsor, he'd be like, I'd be like, no, you just don't understand. And then like literally it'd be sometimes 2 weeks later, the truth would dawn on me, and I would go, and it was then that I started actually, I guess it was almost like that's when I started trusting even more, but also learning real humility, because I was like, I was so convinced that I was right. I was not right. Maybe there's other times when I think I'm right and I'm not right. You know, but to have someone with an egomaniac like us, you know, to have someone that's going to actually go, you're not being honest. And I know this is hard for you to hear right now, but this is what you're doing. But wow, like the men that we get to become by being humble, by being honest, by doing that sort of introspection. You know, I don't want to embarrass my romantic partner, but like, you know, there's stuff that I share with her of my inner dialogue of like where I'm like, do you know what? I need to apologize for something. Do you know what? I might just tell this anecdote. I don't know. Sometimes she's not over the moon when I do this, but I think I might just do it anyway.
Yeah.
It was really,
Go
really,
ahead.
I don't know. I feel compelled. Okay. I don't know how it's going to only sound. Right. Whatever. She's
You can always cut it out.
she wanted, she basically, her ex-boyfriend was over from some other country, and they're going to go meet for a coffee, and she was like, oh, I'm just going to go meet him for a coffee at some point, you know, is that, you know, that's cool. And I'm like genuinely, of course that's cool, like genuinely that's cool. And genuinely, hands down, absolutely sweet, no issues at all. We have a deeply trusting and loving relationship. You know, I would have come if I, you know, I'll say hello, whatever. But then here's where the truth comes in, okay? Because I could see she was a bit nervous for no real reason. I think maybe just because, you know, it's a thing. But I picked up on that nervousness, and my crazy subconscious, or maybe no, it's my ego actually. My ego goes, oh, you could probably benefit from this somehow, right? You could probably, you know, maybe next time she might get jealous about something, perhaps you could use this. All right. Now, I wasn't totally conscious of this immediately, but I could feel that I was enjoying it a bit too much. So later, I think it was the next day, I said, oh, well, I just want to own something. You know, I think, you know, I kind of was enjoying your nervousness because I felt like it's somehow something I might be able to use at some point. And I just want to own that. And I'm sorry, by the way, it's all cool, whatever, you know, have a lovely time. That level of sort of self-honesty, and then just being able to own that and then share that. To be aware of it is, I think, a superpower. To be able to share it in a way that it can be received in that other person. Because what she said to me goes, I just feel so unbelievably safe with you. You know, like you're like, I just know that like you are doing the work constantly to know what's going on. And perhaps this is actually, well, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think like if we move on to like the gifts of recovery later down the line, which is something I didn't, you know, I said I briefly kind of went on it. I touched on this idea of like, all I knew was I'm fine, I'm good, I'm fine, that's it. And I didn't understand them going on underneath. And the biggest thing from the 12 steps is searching inwards and understanding that, because it's in that place, the same sort of voice that was telling you these things. That's the same voice that kept telling me to use. That's the same voice that kept telling me all these like self-centered plans and fantasies about how I was going to control everything. And it's the same voice. That's the voice that's going on. And so all of this work essentially to some extent has been to be able to see that stuff for what it is in the moment. I mean, mainly through meditation and but also, you know, going through, like, let's say, step 4 with our resentments and our fears and our relationships, and looking at like the patterns of how a thought can actually kind of come from a root to where it ends up, you know, why you're having a thought like that.
So what you're talking about right now is knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Being able to know yourself and find peace within that. And if I was just check the time, right? So we're an hour in. So because what you just skimmed over
Yeah, I can tell.
various steps,
Yeah.
and it's like which I think we could do. Like we could do if there was enough interest, we could actually do like an episode on each step.
Yeah, but also at the time it felt like each step. But me and you have talked about the idea that once you get to the end, it all just becomes one.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at the moment I can, if I go into a meeting and I'm doing a share about a specific step, I can go in. But now it's all just about, it's just this big bundle of spirituality, and a large chunk of that is just knowing yourself and being aware of
What
the inner
does knowing
monologue.
yourself give you? Don't try and be clever.
I'm not trying to be clever. I'm trying to think of like, a lot of time I'll try and be clever. What does it actually mean? How can I be interested? I mean, this goes into meditation because I think meditation is the practice to know yourself. And it's how on a daily basis, I'm trying to make sure that I'm in a place where I can know what's going on and see this stuff, like what you're saying, or any sort of psychotic thoughts that I have on a minutely basis. And know myself and being able to see that stuff, for me, just gives me like a second of an opportunity to act differently. Because otherwise, I'm just on autopilot. And before I got into recovery and during the early bits of my recovery, everything was autopilot, no thought around actions. I'd made my mind up. And knowing myself just gives me a chance to like reconsider, open the door and go, whatever. So in that moment where you have that thought, or I'm trying to think of, I've been having so many thoughts like that. I don't know which one to pick. Let's say I notice a thought and I'm about to just jump into action because of it. Through meditation, through like my long process of learning to actually understand myself and know what's going on and separate my thoughts from myself, I have just a second to think, is this my self-centered will again? Which it probably is. And if so, what is God's will that I could replace it with? What is a better option? Should I call someone? Should I ask you about something? What's going on here? Or even just be aware of it, because as soon as I get honest, I see it completely differently. And then I start to sort of like, it's just, I think it's just an opportunity to reconsider. I don't know, that's like,
it's
that's my main thing for me.
It's quite beautiful. And I obviously understand intimately what you're saying. And it's this, it's a spiritual program. What does spirituality mean? You were an atheist, and arguably maybe you still are an atheist. You're certainly not religious, if you don't mind me saying. And I never meditated in my life before recovery. That I thought it was weird, and I thought it was lame, and I just didn't do it. And yet today, I've meditated every day for pretty much for 6.5 years. This is a spiritual program, and it can't be overlooked. And I want to talk a little bit about what that means, because I don't think we'd be doing the concept of 12 step, at least from our subjective perspective. I think we'd be doing it a disservice if we didn't touch on it, because neither of us are spiritual. Now, arguably, we are spiritual. What does all of that mean? And even before we dive into that, I just want to say, Carl Jung, one of the godfathers of psychoanalysis, said, to anyone who had an addiction problem, I can't help you. You need a spiritual awakening. Carl Jung also said, when asked if he believed in God, he said, I don't believe, I know. So the spiritual concept, which is at the cornerstone of 12 step, which can put so many people off. I think it probably put both of us off at one point. Even seeing the word God was sort of almost repellent, coming from a very secular, self-centered world where I didn't know about it, and my experience of religion had just been very, very dogmatic, and, going to church at school, or doing, I did Hebrew school on occasionally on a Sunday when I was a child, and it was just all not great. right? It was just, and I didn't get it, and I didn't like it, and it was weird. But then I sort of came to this concept of spirituality. So two things I would say about spirituality, and then I'll pass it to you. One, the thing I always say about spirituality is that it's about it's not about, it's about the simple perspective that I am not the center of the universe, I am a part of it. That is one of the big fundamentals. And then I heard actually recently another take on what spirituality is, which is spirituality is just resistance. So you were talking then about the pause, right? About the opportunity to pause and act differently. So spirituality being resistance, right? We all have constant impulses to eat sugar, impulses to watch Netflix, impulses to act on lust, feel, do. And what you were describing so beautifully like a few minutes ago was the pause, taking stock and saying, what do I want? What is God's will? What is the act of service I can do here? That concept of resisting our own selfish impulses is what I also think spirituality is. And none of that is about mythical anythings, right? Do you know what I mean? So I'll pass to you.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I always think that those two things are kind of the same thing, because it's only, I mean, they're very, like, at least they're parallel, because it's in that moment. Let's say in meditation, my meditation is very it's not got any sort of like supernatural things as part of it. I've never been one to sort of like, I know a lot of people get into the more sort of like other stuff, but for me, all it is just every single day I sit for 10, 20 minutes and I just notice the thoughts start and stop. And it's in noticing when they stop, because that's the only little, and there's just a little split second when my train of thought stops, that I notice them stop. And because I notice them stop, I know that it's me who is the real one who is noticing the thoughts, a thing, stop and come to a close. There has to be something to notice. And I just do that every day. There's nothing else to it. That was always my idea that was what I kind of built up on my own through just, you told me meditate every day. I was like, I don't know why, I'll do it, sweet.
How's that impacted your life, right? Just give me a couple of examples, just practical. Don't even have to explain why, but just how it has.
I mean, like, you say a big one such as anxiety, which is, I remember having my first like proper panic attack. I'd always been quite panicky, but I remember having like a full blown, I'm on the floor for 40 minutes, unable to move, and my hands were like, and I couldn't talk, and I called the ambulance, I was about to die. And I still didn't understand anything that was going on. I think that's why it got so bad, and why a lot of people have these sort of like debilitating panic attacks. And so let's say on a daily basis now, like, I can still be quite panicky. A lot of my life is led by fear. I still have these sort of core beliefs and fears that can come up and manifest constantly in my life. These thoughts will come into my head, and I can just take a step back and laugh at them. I can have a thought come into my, especially let's go back to recovery, and why meditation is so important in recovery is because I used to be governed by my thoughts, and now I'm not. I'm free. And so when a thought comes into my head and says, you should have a line, you should have a drink, it would make you feel better, I can actually take a step back because I've practiced it so many times. I know the feeling experientially. We're talking right now about it. There's no way of like intellectually understanding this and then just boom, I get it. It was sit down and do it every single day. Oh, I've been doing that for 4.5, 5 years. And now I know what that feeling is like to snap back just for a little moment. And then when anxiety's coming in, when thoughts of using might pop up, when anything.
Well, I think we can, play the tape forward and talk, like romance. We had to learn how to love in this program. We had to learn how to have functional relationships, and the pause that you're describing means, well, before texting that person or approaching that person or acting on those feelings, we don't have to make those mistakes again.
But also, like you were saying, with the thoughts that are coming up between you and your partner, I mean, I had a relationship as a bit of a shambles, but I've had a relationship in recovery, and there is nothing that brings up more feelings, more fear, more insecurity, more jealousy, all of my defects of character. Everything that we work on in the 12 steps, I felt like in a relationship was just magnified by 10. Why? I'm not quite sure. We could go into
Well,
it.
I heard recently that, if you cannot grow profoundly spiritually unless you're in a committed relationship. I choose to believe that this is actually true, because what you just described, what comes up when you're in a romantic relationship,
It's crazy.
you can't grow profoundly unless you're in that dynamic where you have to face those fears repeatedly and let them go and grow through them.
I mean, a lot of, I haven't had, I broke up my last girlfriend a year and a half, maybe
It's a long
almost 2
relationship,
years.
though.
Yeah, it was like 2.5 years. Let's say it's been about almost 2 years since we split up, and I've been kind of just not thinking about that, or I have, but I've been like keeping myself in a bubble. And I was speaking to you about this the other day, like something's come up where I'm suddenly a scenario where there's someone I'm getting attached to, and like we're not in a relationship, nothing is going on. There's actually quite strictly nothing going on, but the presence of a girl I like just triggers everything. All of my insecurities are 10 times. All of my the thoughts that come into my head are psychotic. And I'm going to, there's that sort of thing of when I used to try and go to sleep, and I could sometimes not sleep for like 4 or 5 hours because I'm just thinking about the world's going to end, and now I could be up thinking about a girl, and I just wouldn't be able to get to sleep because I'm so attached to what's going on, and how it consumes you for weeks and months on end. But, through situations like that, it's just like, with this girl the other day, it's like, I'm able to just notice it, take a step back, and the power that gives me. So yeah, I do think relationships are like 10 times kind of, it's just life magnified, or fear and insecurities and stuff magnified. But it's not to say that spirituality is only for relationships. Like, it's obviously just through everything in my work, in my, all the things that relationships work, friendships and family, and just kind of like anything. It's just an ability to like step back, because I can be such a psycho and I will act on it.
Yeah, but and that's it. This is this 12-step program showed me how to live. The whole premise of this podcast is about sharing what I have learned on the way, and through introduction to spirituality in 12-step recovery, that has impacted every aspect of my life. And I my personal opinion on 12-step is that it's not that it's really quite simple. It's an amalgamation of analysis, therapeutic analysis, self-analysis, stoicism, the philosophies of the best of the major world religions, amalgamated into a way to live. And it's really, really, really beautiful and amazing. But look, I think we've covered enough ground today, but perhaps we may have to revisit, depending on how it's all received. But
I do think as well, just lastly, which just popped into my head, because I know I was listening to your episodes, and
thanks for that.
We were talking about the sponsor relationship and how that sort of like translates, and also just like the structure of the fellowships. They all kind of like follow basically the same thing. And it's not just in the sort of like tools that we're given through the steps and stuff, but also like the meetings that go alongside the steps, and the way that we learn to have proper relationships, like whether it be with sponsor, sponsee, but also just generally meetings, the idea of doing service, the idea of showing up and being held accountable, and listening to other people's opinions. If you get service, and you have your groups meeting once a month, and you have to kind of listen to people's opinions as you discuss matters. Like, there's so many things in the way that it's all structured that is like a mini way of living life. And then you take all of those lessons out and start applying them to everyone else, and treating your family the way that you treat your fellowship peers. and you go into a relationship in the way that you treat people, and just the sort of like the sort of segues is
The self-esteem,
as well as
this is true self-esteem, all right? Self-esteem, for years, I thought self-esteem was something I had to get from outside. I thought it had to be about affirmation or accolades or wealth or something that someone had to give me, and it wasn't. Self-esteem came from doing esteemable things, right? Which meant just being of service to other people, helping others. And again, that's what 12-step taught me. And, I think it's why people in 12-step fellowships did so well during lockdown, was that we had each other. Like, we had a space where we could connect and talk and be honest. And it was, I just remember when lockdown happened and how quickly we all moved online. And just, it was like, we were okay. I actually then set up a couple of other I set up a couple of meetings just with some of the dads at my kids' school. Right. So I made like little mini groups because I saw how important it was for us. And so I said, okay, well, let's just create some men's circles, if you like, online. And it was just very, very powerful stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you said something quite a few times earlier on my recovery, which is be the man. Like, you can end up being the man that other men can drink from. Is that the word? Is that paraphrased?
It's from my sponsor, and it never quite makes sense, and it all sounds a little bit homoerotic.
Yeah,
right? But it's something like what does he say? It's like be the cup that all men can drink from.
Weird. But it makes sense to me in my head. I think when and you're saying with your men's meetings that when I remember the first time when I was doing step 4, and it's all about resentments and understanding resentments. And I told one of my friends frantically when I resented him, and I resent him because he's funny and good looking. And that was basically it. And I was just like, you make me feel unfunny and ungood looking. And I told him that, and he was like, I guess I get it. I just never imagined like talking to people about that. So, and this sort of like, when you bring these things into other relationships, people are like really intrigued, because it's just like most people don't act like this.
Well, I'll tell you what I've
have honesty
out.
like that. And
what I've worked out is that when you are that honest with someone, when you are vulnerable and you show your true self to someone, right, the act of that humanity is almost, it can't be, it's an act of trust and love that is very hard to respond to with anything but trust and love.
Yeah.
And so when I share that vulnerability with you and you hold that, right, you don't ridicule me, you don't punish me, you don't laugh at me, you don't tell me I'm bad, but you go, I can hold that.
And I get it.
And I respect it, respect you for telling it. And then you share back to me. We've created something. We're building something there. And that is trust. And that is safety. And that is the feeling of being held. And that feeling is amazing, right? To go through life, not that I am against everyone, but actually there are people in this world that I feel held by.
Weird.
Beautiful.
Yeah, the start, it was weird.
Of course it is.
And now it's
weird, because we grew up not necessarily feeling safe. Like, I grew up, with parents arguing or whatever, or being insecure, whatever it was, I didn't feel safe. So then to feel safe, what should just be normal, right?
Yeah.
Is and this is to your point, it's weird. But then that weird can then become normal. And that's where this is what recovery is about. It's taking these dysfunctional feelings and then replacing them with functional ones, and that becoming normal.
Yeah.
Anyway, we could go on. Look, thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your willingness.
It's all right.
Open-mindedness. I appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll...
Happy to be of service.
Exactly. And on that note, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Learning How to Live. If this sparked something for you, share it, subscribe, and remember, you don't have to escape your life. You can build one worth staying for.